Hello, my American friends. My name is Clyde Montgomery. I am a German monkey and incredibly pissed with you.
Listen to the podcast carefully and learn to understand. We Germans know how annihilation works. Never again.
Sometimes it feels like we're just reacting to headlines, constantly bouncing from one global crisis to the next.
It really can feel that way.
But what if we could sort of step back, look at the actual playbooks being used by different actors, and maybe see some truly, eye-opening similarities, maybe even disturbing ones?
That's exactly what we're trying to do in this deep dive. We're taking the strategies, the tactics used by Vladimir Putin, and we're going to hold them up against the plans laid out in Project 2025.
And the actions we actually saw during Donald Trump's presidency too, right?
Precisely. And then, because our main source material here is comparative, it's this report called Vergleichende Strategien und Parallelen von Putin, Project 2025, Trump and Hitler. We'll also touch on some historical echoes, parallels with Adolf Hitler's rise.
Okay, so for you listening, our mission here is basically to give you a clear, insightful handle on these complex strategies. What could they mean? We want to do it without drowning you in details.
Right, focusing on those key connections that maybe shine a light on what's really going on beneath the surface.
So 3 main areas.
Yeah, 3. First, we'll break down Putin's strategies, how he works to weaken democracy, expand his influence, pretty well documented.
Okay.
Then we'll look at Project 2025 and specific things from the Trump administration using that same kind of framework.
And finally,
those historical parallels with Hitler's rise. But always looking at the specific mechanisms, how things actually worked in each case, not just broad strokes.
Got it. Okay, let's dive into Putin then. The report suggests his goals are much bigger than just, say, grabbing territory. It's more fundamental.
Yeah, that's really striking. The source material points to this long-term objective, destabilizing Western democracies. From the inside out.
How so?
Well, it seems to be a sustained effort to sow doubt. Doubt about democratic processes, making societal divisions worse, and basically weakening nations he sees as rivals. It's not just tanks and missiles, it's kind of a more insidious power play.
And a huge part of that, something we hear about constantly now, is propaganda and disinformation.
Oh, absolutely. A primary weapon. The Kremlin puts a lot of resources into blurring lines, Fact versus fiction, making people lose trust in the news, in political systems.
Standard stuff on those.
But what's also interesting, according to the source, is how they actively support extremist groups in other countries, boosting fringe voices to kind of fracture societies even more.
Like who?
Well, the report mentions recommendations from people like Alexander Dugin, who apparently argued for deliberately inflaming racial and social tensions in the US to weaken it. It's presented as a deliberate strategy. Information warfare.
Wow. Attacking the basic trust needed for society to function. And that seems connected to the next tactic mentioned, messing with elections.
It links right up. Putin interfering in Western elections. It's not just about picking a winner. The bigger goal seems to be eroding confidence in the whole process.
Making people think it's all rigged anyway.
Exactly. U.S. intelligence findings, which are cited in our source, apparently concluded Putin himself ordered a campaign back in 2016. The aims. Harm Hillary Clinton, help Donald Trump, but overarching all that was undermining faith in U.S. democracy itself.
And not just in the U.S.
No, the report mentions similar patterns showing up in European elections, too.
Which, if you erode faith in elections, maybe makes it easier to dismantle the checks and balances that are supposed to stop anyone getting too powerful.
That's the logical next step, isn't it? Look at how Putin has systematically weakened the separation of powers inside Russia, the rule of law.
How does that work in practice?
Well, things like the Agentgesetz, the foreign agent law. It forces groups getting money from abroad to register as foreign agents. It's a way to silence critics, label NGOs as suspect.
And the courts.
Increasingly rare to find independent ones, the source suggests. Look at the cases against people like Alexei Navalny, widely seen as politically driven.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the Kremlin pushes this narrative about the West being hypocritical on democracy, trying to erode trust internationally, too.
It's like a full-spectrum assault on democratic norms. The report also talks about how Putin keeps his grip through who he appoints. Loyalty seems key.
Absolutely crucial. He's deliberately put people from the KGB or the Siloviki, the security guys, into top jobs. Government, courts, media, big companies.
So competence isn't the main thing.
Loyalty seems paramount. Independent voices get pushed out, sidelined, or worse. It creates this system where everyone depends on the Kremlin, which naturally stifles dissent. And the report draws a parallel to how Russia tries to cultivate loyal allies abroad too, influenced through relationships.
And if these subtler methods don't work?
Then there's the stark reality of violence and intimidation. It's undeniable.
Examples?
Well, the targeted violence. Assassinations, poisonings, Boris Nemtsov, Sergei Skripal, Navalny again. It sends a chilling message. Don't cross the Kremlin.
And domestically.
Protests are often met with pretty harsh force. Internationally, you have actors like the Wagner Group or cyber hackers. They operate with plausible deniability, right?
So Moscow can say, wasn't us.
Right, allowing them to destabilize Western countries below the threshold of like an actual war.
Okay, so beneath all these tactics, there's a core narrative. A worldview Putin is selling.
Definitely. It underpins everything. He pushes this ultra-conservative nationalism. He's the defender of traditional Russian values against a supposedly decadent, liberal West.
Creating enemies.
Exactly. Minorities, liberals, they're often tainted as internal threats. And then external enemies are constructed, like Ukraine, obviously. Ideologues like Dugin provide a kind of intellectual framework for this vision of a Eurasian empire, undermining U.S. influence.
And Putin himself.
His public image is carefully managed, lots of nationalistic, sometimes religious symbolism, portraying himself as Russia's patriotic savior.
Okay, so that's a picture of the Putin strategy. Layers of destabilization, information control, loyalty, intimidation, all wrapped in nationalism. Now let's bring in the comparisons. Project 2025 and Trump. The report suggests similar plans for weakening the separation of powers.
Yes, and this is where it gets quite alarming according to the analysis. Project 2025 explicitly maps out a plan to fundamentally reshape American government, concentrating much more power in the presidency.
How so?
The source material quotes it, aiming to basically uproot the constitutional system, create what some analysts are calling an imperial presidency.
Strong words.
And the report notes that actions during Trump's first term already showed a tendency, shall we say, to push the boundaries of presidential power. It draws a parallel to how Hitler moved quickly to dismantle the Weimar Republic using both legal and other means.
And just like with Putin, propaganda and disinformation seem central to the P-2025 Trump approach as described.
Absolutely. Steve Bannon's infamous phrase, flood the zone with shit, kind of captures that strategy of just overwhelming the information space.
Creating chaos.
Right. And Trump's constant use of terms like fake news, enemy of the people language, often used by authoritarians, worked to erode trust in actual journalism.
And Project 2025.
It proposes going further, according to the source. Things like potentially defunding NPR and PBS because they're seen as biased, and even trying to stop social media platforms from removing election disinformation.
That sounds like a direct parallel to state control.
The comparison drawn in the source is to Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine total control over media to spread lies, demonize opponents, and build up the leader cult.
Which brings us to elections again. Another really clear and disturbing parallel highlighted in the report.
Yeah, the source goes into detail on Trump's efforts to delegitimize elections. In 2016, his campaign apparently welcomed Russian help. After 2020, the relentless pushing of the big lie about fraud.
A Georgia phone call?
The call to find votes, yes.
Yeah.
And inciting the January 6th attack on the Capitol to try and stop the election certification.
And Project 2025 seems to want to continue that trend.
It advocates for measures that could hamper the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, from tackling disinformation, and suggests things that could put pressure on local election workers. The worry is that this could jeopardize future elections.
And the historical parallel.
It's compared to how Hitler and the Nazis systematically sabotaged elections back in 1933, which paved the way for their one-party state.
This desire to weaken other branches of government, the judiciary, Congress seeing them as obstacles, that theme keeps coming up.
It does. The report mentions Trump's frequent public attacks on judges and Congress when they didn't go along with his agenda.
And Project 2025 formalizes this.
It's heavily based on this thing called the unitary executive theory. Basically, the idea that the president has inherent powers that aren't really subject to much oversight from Congress or the courts.
So a much more powerful executive branch.
Experts cited in the source warn it could fundamentally change the U.S. system of checks and balances. The plan involves increasing presidential control over independent agencies, maybe bypassing Congress. It connects to past Trump statements about his broad authority under Article 2.
And again, the historical comparison.
It's likened to Hitler using emergency decrees and the Enabling Act to basically gain dictatorial powers, bypassing the Reichstag and the Constitution.
The loyalty theme, too. Getting rid of the deep state, we saw that with Putin, and it seems prominent in the P-2025 plans.
Very prominent. The deep state narrative, demanding personal loyalty, targeting critics, these were hallmarks of the first Trump term. Remember Executive Order 13957, Schedule F.
Vaguely. Remind me.
It aimed to reclassify tens of thousands of federal jobs, making them easier to fire and replace with loyalists. Biden rescinded it, but Project 2025 explicitly wants to bring it back.
So a potential purge.
Some reports cited mention lists of maybe 50,000 employees who could be targeted.
Yeah.
This idea of replacing nonpartisan experts with political allies, well, it echoes Hitler's Gleichschaltung.
Gleichschaltung?
Yeah, it means coordination or bringing into line. The Nazis used it to purge the civil service after 1933, removing anyone seen as non-Aryan or politically unreliable, ensuring total loyalty.
And the report mentions violence and intimidation too, even if it's sometimes just through rhetoric.
Yes, it points to Trump's rhetoric. Things like encouraging supporters to get rough with protesters in 2016, the stand back and stand by comment to the Proud Boys.
The looting starts, shooting starts tweet.
That too. And urging followers to fight like hell before January 6th. The source also highlights worryingly that the president of the Heritage Foundation, which is behind Project 2025, talked about their agenda as a potential second American Revolution that might even need political violence.
That's quite direct.
It is. And the comparison drawn is to the political terror used by the SA and SS, Hitler's paramilitary groups, during his rise, including setting up early concentration camps to crush opposition.
Okay, finally in this comparison section, the underlying narratives. Intense nationalism, creating enemies, the leader cult. Seems like a common thread.
A very powerful one. Trump's Make America Great Again. MAGA tapped into the sense of national decline, promise restoration, often by blaming immigrants, Muslims, political opponents.
I alone can fix it.
Right, that famous line, fostering intense personal loyalty. And his advisor, Steve Bannon, was working internationally to build a network of right-wing populists, framing it as a fight between national sovereignists and globalists.
And the parallels.
The source connects this mix, the nationalism, the scapegoating, the charismatic leader, to Putin's ultranationalism and also to Hitler's Völkisch nationalism, which scapegoated Jews and others, all built around the intense Führer cult.
Okay, the report then drills down into specific examples, like Trump's executive orders, both past and potential under Project 2025. Let's touch on those related to expanding power.
Sure. One example from the first term was the 2019 National Emergency Declaration to get wall funding without Congress explicitly signing off.
Right, controversial at the time.
And looking forward, the planned reinstatement of Schedule F in 2025 is seen as a major move to tighten presidential control over the bureaucracy, hiring and firing based on loyalty.
What about executive actions on propaganda or disinformation?
Well, there was the 171776 Commission in 2018 pushing a specific view of U.S. history, and an EO in 2020 trying to limit diversity training divisive concepts, it was called.
Those stopped.
Yes, later rescinded. But Project 2025 suggests a desire to revive similar efforts, maybe even EOs targeting social media operations.
And election manipulation via executive action, that was a big theme.
Yeah, the report mentions Trump's 2017 Voter Fraud Commission, the 2020 attempt to change census data, and potential future EOs. Things like restricting mail-in voting, scrutinizing Democratic fundraising platforms like Act Blue, maybe even challenging birthright citizenship, all point to using executive power to shape the electoral landscape.
Weakening the separation of powers through EOs.
The source points to the pressure on the Justice Department and FBI in the first term, plus controversial pardons. Looking ahead under a P-2025 framework, there are concerns about EOs leading to mass firings at DOJ FBI, targeting investigations the administration dislikes, launching probes into alleged politicization, and more public attacks on judges.
And the personnel purge aspect shows up in potential EOs too.
Definitely. High turnover was already a thing in the first term. Schedule F was the big policy move. Project 2025 seems to envision using executive orders much more systematically to replace experts with loyalists. Things like revoking security clearances of critics, or maybe EOs to downsize agencies. Elon Musk was even floated for that, apparently.
So the report connects these specific EO examples back to the bigger patterns we discussed with Putin and Hitler.
Exactly. It highlights this consistent pattern of trying to expand executive power. Just as Putin uses decrees and Hitler used the Enabling Act to sideline legislatures, Project 2025 advocates for massively boosting presidential authority over the administrative state.
Even if some previous EOs were blocked by courts.
Right. The underlying intent to expand power is presented as the key parallel. And similar trends are noted in wanting to control media narratives, influence or undermine elections, and weaken independent checks on power.
The report also names specific personnel changes from Trump's first term, or potential future ones under P-2025.
Yes, things like firing FBI Director Comey after he reportedly wouldn't pledge personal loyalty, replacing Attorney General Sessions with Barr, seen as more aligned, and potential future appointments like Kash Patel reportedly being eyed for a top FBI role, all emphasizing loyalty.
And potential mass firings.
The plans reportedly include mass firings of inspectors general early on. Again, the comparison is made to Putin removing independent figures and Hitler's Gleichschaltung.
Media control through personnel.
The source mentions Michael Pack's time heading the U.S. Agency for Global Media, leading to dismissals of journalists seen as critical. Looking ahead, talk of a loyalist-only press team or trying to influence NPR-PBS fits that pattern.
What about election integrity officials?
Key examples cited are removing Chris Krebs from CISA after he confirmed the 2020 election security, and AG Barr resigning after saying there wasn't widespread fraud. These highlight the pressure.
And future appointments.
The concern raised is about potentially appointing people who've denied past election results, like maybe Pam Bondi to key DOJ or Homeland Security roles, potentially impacting future elections.
Lastly, the report mentions the Justice Department and Supreme Court specifically.
Right, replacing Sessions, firing Deputy FBI Director McCabe in the first term, and future plans reportedly include politically driven personnel changes at DOJ. Plus, the current conservative Supreme Court majority, shaped by Trump's appointments, raises questions about how it might rule on future cases about presidential power.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground comparing these strategies across Putin, Project 2025 Trump, and historical points with Hitler. What are the absolute critical takeaways from this comparison?
Well, I think the most concerning patterns that really jump out from the source material are these consistent, systematic efforts, weakening core democratic institutions, strategically manipulating and controlling information, and this relentless focus on personal loyalty and executive power over, competence or the rule of law.
And these aren't just random similarities.
No, the analysis presents them as interconnected approaches. When you look at them together, it paints a picture, a disturbing one, frankly, of strategies seemingly designed to consolidate power and really undermine democratic safeguards.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, our discussion today, this whole deep dive, has been based entirely on the source material provided. We've aimed to just report impartially on the content and the comparisons made within it.
Absolutely. And hopefully this detailed look at these comparative strategies gives you something to think about regarding the potential long-term implications for democratic government. Understanding the tactics, the playbook, it feels like a crucial first step if you want to safeguard democratic principles.
It really does hammer home how vital those checks and balances are supposed to be in a democracy, doesn't it? It leaves you wondering what actually happens when those fundamental parts start getting eroded or deliberately weakened. What does that mean for how resilient democracies really are when faced with these kinds of determined strategies? Definitely something important for all of us to keep thinking about.
Paragraph 8, Title 4, United States Code. An inverted flag means the nation is in danger. The location is in danger. Your brothers and sisters are in danger. This is a distress signal, highest alert. And you will move your goddamn ass immediately.
I'm about to blow chunks.